as I may not be positioning this as a podcast, kind of follows a kind of podcasty theme, even though I'm calling it a talk show, because I'm talking to people and it's on camera, so it's not actually a podcast, even if I subsequently maybe release the audio as a podcast. Therefore, I have to indulge in the rite of passage that so many podcasts have to endure, the awkward and uncalled for first episode where I just talk to myself, or at least talk to, a potential audience by myself. So this is a show within my YouTube channel that I'm going to call Unsustainable. For the most part, it's going to be me talking to people who I find interesting, and in particular people who are doing things in a way that I admire. And the reason I've called it unsustainable, the reason that I've chosen that word, is because I want to look at the practices, the business practices, the health practices, the environmental practices that we engage in that make or break our longevity. So what do I mean by that? What I want to talk about is how you can keep doing what you like doing. And I'm going to find out from different people how they keep doing what they keep doing. So I'm talking about sustainable in a broad sense. I'm not talking about sustainable in the sense that we often hear it, where it's like environmental, don't use plastic bottles because it's unsustainable. I'm talking about like it's unsustainable to not have a system in place to sort out your finances when you're starting a business. It's unsustainable to not have a good way of keeping track of the way you create your videos if you are starting a YouTube channel. It's unsustainable to not think about your health, whatever you do. If you're in a whatever job and you ignore your health, that's going to come back to bite you. It's an unsustainable practice not to think about it. So I'm trying to gather information from a variety of people on best practices, basically. And I'm framing that as like, is it sustainable for you to do this? So in my first proper episode, which isn't this one, my first proper episode will be I'm going to call it episode 1, because this one's going to be called episode 0, I guess. And I sit down and talk to Charlotte. Charlotte runs a business where she helps people create the brand around their business. Okay, she helps. Yeah. I mean, that's a weird, convoluted way of putting it. For all intents and purposes, she's a designer, but a designer that is focusing on sustainability, ethical behavior, and a sustainable approach to mental health and well-being and work-life balance, things like that. So we talk about a lot of different sustainable and unsustainable practices. We talk about long-term goals and how you sustain yourself through those long-term goals. We talk about the approach you have to your business. And a lot of this comes from me just being really interested in why people do things, how people justify doing things, how people look to the future of their own health, their business, their work-life balance, things like that. Because I want to get this knowledge. I could just go out and talk to these people and, go and sit with them, have a coffee and ask them these questions, and I would be the only one finding out about these things. But I thought, why not bring you guys along? Why not let you in on these kind of secrets? Or they're not really secrets, they're just the things that people don't realize other people want to hear. And for the longest time, I've been sort of obsessed with process. And process kind of comes in all sorts of forms. Process can be like the habits you have that help you kind of get up in the morning and get out of bed. It can be the distinct stages that you follow when you're creating a piece of art. That's your process. It can be how you approach cooking a meal in the evening. You know, like you come home and like, what is it that triggers that process? What is it that defines that process? How does it look? Does it change from time to time? I find that really interesting. Often I find it is interesting visually, and that's how I came to it. So I remember when I was first developing these ideas, I worked with someone who was doing ceramics, and I documented that process with photographs, and that was incredible. I absolutely loved that. I loved the photographs from that, and the act of doing that cemented this belief that process is almost everything. And one of the books that I just read really recently, only just finished reading it, is Atomic Habits by James Clear. And one of the things that he sets out in that is that we are not, how does he put it? We don't rise to our goals. We don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. Systems is just another word for processes. So my recent thing, or the thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently, is the habits and the systems that I put in place to make sure I read more books. For years and years, I would just put, whether it was written down or whether it was just in my head, on my sort of list of New Year's resolutions, there'd always be like, read more books, or read a book a week, or some sort of either vague or lofty goal like that. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago where I sort of reframed the goal. I don't even need the goal. It's good to have. It's good to kind of check back on at the end of the year. But if you're always focused on the goal, it's easy to just not even think about how you're going to do that, how you're going to achieve it. And so instead of the goal being the driving force, without really realizing what I was doing, I changed it so the system was the driving force. And so a couple of things happened. I decided to look at where my time was going, and I noticed that I was spending a lot of time on my phone, scrolling social media. And I thought, why do I do that? And so I realized that if I ever get my phone out for any reason, I end up on social media. I'm drawn to that. So I changed a couple of things. I moved it to a less convenient spot on my home screen, and I bought myself a watch. And what that did was it meant that if I needed to check the time, I looked at my watch. It took a split second, and it meant I wasn't looking at my phone, because before it would mean taking my phone out, looking at it, probably opening it up, because you kind of just do that by habit. From that, then you're on the phone, and it's very easy to click on social media. 15 minutes later, you've wasted all that time. By putting some difficulty in the way, I made it so I wasn't going on my phone as much. What I then tried to do was put books in the way of that as well. So if I do have the time and I've not clicked onto social media, if I've got a book that's close by, I can just read for 15 minutes instead. If I've got that time, then I can read instead, surely. And that worked a little bit. It takes some effort and some training. Your brain kind of wants to do the old things that it did. Another thing was changing my routine and having a book be the last thing I saw at night. So instead of scrolling my phone before I went to bed, instead of watching TV until I was too tired to stay awake, I would go up to bed and read my book. Great, okay. When I set those things in motion, instead of having a goal of reading a book a week, which I always failed, never managed it, I kind of said, just read a couple of pages when you get a chance. Read a couple of pages before you go to bed. Read a couple of pages instead of scrolling on Instagram. And that changed the whole system. And the year that I did that, I read 54 books. I surpassed the goal that I didn't even have. I had it in the back of my mind. I had it as like a thing to look back at the end of the year and see, did I read that many books? I did. The next year, I took it a step further. I started tracking how many I read in a way that I could see. So we've got a little notice board out in the hallway. Walk past it hundreds of times a day. Started putting a little, like a prison tally. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I see that every day now. And I've seen that every day for, the whole of 2019. It's there for me to like remind me to do those other things, like wearing my watch. So I check the time on my watch. Not going on social media, not going on it mindlessly. And so in 2019, when I implemented the tracking of it, bear in mind I'd already set the other systems and they'd already become kind of habit. Setting an accountability and a visual way of tracking and seeing what was happening meant that I read another 9 books on top of the 54. So I read 63 books last year, far surpassing the goals that I was never even getting anywhere near years before. And that was all by ignoring the goal and favouring the process. And that's so intriguing. I mean, do you not think that that's really exciting? The way that you can hack your body, your mind, by doing little things instead of dreaming big, by achieving. So James Clear says like the 1% every day. It's like compound interest. It just builds. Instead of setting a lofty goal, you do a tiny thing. And that can be like for your health, that can be for your business. And it's incredible. I think that's why process is a thing that I'm fascinated by. And so I want to give myself an opportunity to go and speak to these people who, do things that I don't yet and do things that you don't yet. And we can share in that like learning. So that's why Unsustainable is a thing. And that's why I'm calling it Unsustainable. I really hope that it can build into the thing that I'm envisioning in my head. I really hope that you guys, the audience, can help me build the opportunities so we can all learn together. We can all go out there and implement these things because you've allowed me to find the people so we can share in it. So if you like the sound of that, go ahead and subscribe. If I do eventually put this as a podcast, follow along with the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. I don't know what the verbiage is when it comes to podcasts, but make sure you get yourself notified. The more I can see that people like this, the more I'll be able to do it. And thanks. And watch out for my interview with Charlotte coming soon. Bye, guys.